This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen. With Chris Clark.
The 2007 South Carolina class was, at that time, 6th in the country and 4th in the SEC, which is amazing.
Wes Mitchell.
You know, I think if you're South Carolina, you're aiming to at least be at 50%. Then in theory, you're adding talent, you're getting better, you're putting yourself in a position to compete.
And Tyler Head.
It's been a great week for South Carolina. On the recruiting front, still certainly plenty to talk about.
On the home of the Gamecocks, 107.5 The Game.
And welcome into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Here at 107.5 The Game, Tyler Head and Wes Mitchell along with you on this Thursday morning. Thank you once again to Karina Zullo from Gamecock Women's Soccer for hanging out with us during the Garnet Trust Hour there, which you can listen to shortly on the 107.5 The Game podcasting page if you missed any of that conversation. You know, she talked about how competitive she was, and I noticed before she left the studio, she did play a little bit of cornhole, and based on your reaction, it looked like she did pretty well.
Yeah, she did. That was the first time, so we're going to kind of, I think, make all of our guests do that.
Sure.
And that was the first time we've done that. But she did. She had 4 tosses, 1 on the board, and 1 actually hit. So in the hole.
So what would the point total on that be?
That would be a 4.
4? Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to record
she got
her
4.
score, and the next person that comes in, see if they can beat it.
We'll have to get another board over here.
Oh, exactly.
To keep up with that. My biggest takeaway was that she can beat Hunter Rogers in a race.
That's what she said.
According to her.
I mean, like I said, I think we need to organize a Gamecock Central / Garnet Trust, either 40-yard dash or mile run or something between the two of them.
I think she would crush him in the mile.
Yeah.
Being a soccer player.
Now Hunter's pretty tall. He's got a good long stride. That may help him out a little bit.
I'm not buying it. I think soccer players, I have so much respect. The endurance that comes along with playing soccer, and that's not my sport at all. I don't understand it. I don't know the intricacies of it, but
sure.
Soccer players, I tip my hat to them.
The conditioning that they have to have is unbelievable.
Yes.
I don't know how they do it.
No, it's very impressive. By the way, special guest today, I think, so Colin Taylor, who was on earlier, is still sitting outside.
Right.
I think he's doing their podcast right now. But we're going to have Nick De La Torre from GatorsOnline on at 11:30 to preview this matchup. I told everybody yesterday, they cover this thing in the Florida market, baseball being what we're talking about. They cover baseball the way it's close to the way it's covered here at South Carolina, which is really cool. So I think there's a lot of great content leading up to this matchup.
Well, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday. These two programs are in very similar positions, and both of them have enjoyed success over the past 10 years or so. Obviously, South Carolina won its back-to-back national championships. Florida has its in 2017. They met for the national championship in 2011, and both, fan bases have an expectation that, hey, we should be, regularly going to super regionals, going to Omaha, 3 out of 5 years, those kind of things. And when you look since 2018, neither one of those teams have accomplished any of that. And so now for both of them to get back to a super regional facing off against each other, only obviously one of them can go. I can understand how both teams and both fan bases kind of feel in a similar place about this.
Yeah, and obviously it's interesting. I saw the SEC I think right after, I can't remember which game had completed, but they tweeted out, two SEC teams will be in Omaha.
Yes.
And so in this case, you're going to automatically eliminate an SEC team, but it guarantees an SEC team will have that spot. So, I think it's kind of fitting that, yes, the SEC sort of took control of all the regional spots as far as hosts. Not that all of them advance, but now the SEC is kind of going to cannibalize itself a little bit in terms of who actually gets these all-important 8 Omaha slots. Right. And so now I think it's kind of fitting when you look at the fact that that Florida series win was kind of the one we all talked about, not just at South Carolina, but from an SEC standpoint and really even a national standpoint. When you look at Carolina, maybe even getting a host. Do they get a host if they only won 2 out of 3 against Florida? I'd say probably not.
Right.
And so that was such a key sort of point in the season for South Carolina. It kind of feels like it was a key point in the season for Florida as well, because I think they really turned it on and played much better after that. So I don't know if that was a coincidence or not. I would imagine it probably wasn't. It was probably something where that sort of woke them up a little bit. And so really these two teams have been long tied together both this season and, like you said, in the last, I guess, over a decade. And kind of fitting that they are each standing in each other's way as far as another trip to Omaha. And leaning on my guy Parker, Statso War on Twitter. I talk about him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I know Colin's got like 10 Excel sheets on his computer over there, but have y'all talked about, I know y'all talked about some stats, I'm sure, some analytics, some projections. Did y'all talk about Parker's?
Yeah, we talked about Parker's, and I believe he's the one that tweeted about probably South Carolina having a 47% chance to get out of the Super as opposed to Florida's 53. So, pretty even split there. Could kind of go either way. And again, and Coach Kingston talked about this yesterday when meeting with the media. Yeah, you swept them earlier on in the season, but as you mentioned, they've been playing exceptional baseball since then, and it's pretty much like taking on a whole new team this weekend.
Yeah, and, I think if you look at 57 or 53-47, that's a coin flip.
Yeah.
So, that feels about right to me. I look at these two teams. This kind of feels like it might be that Spaceball series. And what I mean by that is, hey, does that roller to the 6-hole sneak through or not?
Yeah.
I think this is a 3-game series. I think they're evenly matched. I think Florida on paper probably you'd say has more talent overall.
Sure.
But I think when you talk about talent, you're more talking about MLB draft projections.
Yeah.
As far as college players go and having depth and having a bunch of guys that can go out there and do it at this level. South Carolina, when they're going right, is as good as anybody out there. So I think it matches up to be a really, really fun series. Mark Kingston talked quite a bit about some different scenarios. He was, as you would expect, played it kind of coy, didn't announce starters yet. I think we'd all be shocked if it's not Hicks game 1 and Mahoney game 2.
Right.
Is there any indication it's going to be anything but that?
I don't have any doubts about that. And I was talking with Colin earlier. I feel like those two guys are kind of the X factor of this series. And like you said, I feel like it's probably going to end up going to 3 games. But, those two being the starters for game 1 and game 2, more likely than not, as they have been over these past couple of weekends. We saw South Carolina in that month or so where they were losing so many games fall behind really, really early, get down 2-3 runs by the 4th inning. They're having to claw your way back. We saw the complete reverse of that this past weekend at the regional, where they were the ones jumping on opponents early, and the starting pitching was holding opponents down until the middle of the game usually. I feel like that's going to be so important because, again, as you mentioned, so much talent on this Florida team, especially offensively. If you fall behind by 3 runs going into the 4th or 5th inning, that's going to be a tall task to try and claw your way out of.
Certainly, and I was looking at some of Will Sanders' quotes, and he had some good stuff, just talking about doing whatever the team needs and talking about kind of dealing with some of the adversity he's dealt with this year. But he all but said James and Jack will go the first two as well. So you got to imagine internally that's what everybody has either been told, or I don't even know if you have to tell them at this point. Like that's the direction this thing is headed. I think it's going to be really fun to see what happens if there's a game 3 and how you handle that. I tend to think you can still get away with pitching Sanders a little bit, maybe in a game 1, and still starting him in a game 3 if it's a opener situation.
Yeah, it just depends on how much you ask of him in that first game. And again, that all kind of depends on scenarios, because what he came in against Central Connecticut State and tossed the 1 inning last Friday night, and then came in with the 3 innings against Campbell on Sunday. And again, it all just kind of depends on how you shake out, how many arms you use out of your bullpen and all that stuff. Definitely, it's a conversation worth having about whether you start him in a game 3 scenario or continue what you've been doing with Matthew Becker. Now, again, you hope that you just go through the first 2 games, win those, don't have to worry about this. But as you mentioned, I feel like this is one of those series that has 3 games written all over it.
Doesn't it feel like baseball just finds a way?
It usually does.
To even out?
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost uncanny. And I mean, how many times you watched a team where they're 2 pretty evenly matched teams and you just feel like, man, they should have won game 1 of a series, and they kind of just miss an opportunity, they blow it, or they get some bad luck.
Right.
It feels like game 2 comes along, everything that went against them in game 1 kind of shifts back and goes their way. Next thing you know, the 2 teams are playing a decisive game 3 situation, just like you expected from the beginning. And I you can't rule out, obviously, somebody just kind of winning both and being done with it, but this just feels like it's going to be a 3-game situation, that it's going to come down to probably some high-leverage, stressful situations, maybe a close game, maybe some back and forth, much like these 2 Braves games where the Braves have beaten the Mets the last 2 days. Let me just throw that out there. But I think it's going to be fun, man. This is what South Carolina baseball is all about. If you are a South Carolina fan, if you grew up in the state of South Carolina, if you've been following this team for 15, 20 years, really more than that, man. Go back 25 years. Go back basically to the turn, to Y2K.
Yep.
Since then, that's when, South Carolina most of these years has been in meaningful baseball games. So that's where you want to be. You want to be in this spot. You want to have a chance to go out there and put your best foot forward and see what happens. But I think my biggest takeaway for this sort of weekend, too, is for the fans out there, like, let's all just enjoy this, because this is really, truly what it's all about. If you're a player, this is why you pick an SEC school. If you're a fan, this is why you're a fan of a school like South Carolina.
Right. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about things from the Florida perspective with Nick De La Torre from On3 and Gators Online coming up at 11:30, and he'll give us a little bit more insight on what's going on down there in Gainesville as we set you up for the Super Regional coming up. First game tomorrow at 6 o'clock, pregame coverage starting right here on 107.5 The Game at 5:45. And then on Saturday, first pitch at 3, pregame coverage starting at 2:45, again right here on 107.5 The Game. Up next, though, dive a little bit into recruiting, because there's some new names you need to know for the 2024 and 2025 recruiting class. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5 The Game.
We tell you about Firehouse Subs every single day of the week, and that's because there is a Firehouse Subs special sub every single day of the week. Today is Thursday. That means spicy Cajun chicken. What does that mean? You can get a medium sub for $7.99 every single day of the week. You get a small for $5.99, but we here at the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour always go with the medium. Again, medium sub, $7.99. Go to firehousesubs.com, or if you want to make it even easier, download the app, put your information in, then you can seamlessly hit that rapid rescue and order your sub. Get your lunch waiting on you on the desk, or on the shelf there, I should say, with your chips in the bag, which is an important distinction. The chips will be in there, so don't steal chips like I accidentally did one time. Again, today, spicy Cajun chicken. Little preview, Friday, Jamaican jerk turkey. And we don't tell you about the weekend subs enough. On Saturday, club on a sub. And Sunday, one of my favorites, the Italian. Again, every single day of the week, Firehouse Subs has a daily medium sub for you, $7.99. Order it right now.
Top performer at last week's Shane Beamer football camp this past Friday, potentially joining the Gamecocks in the 2024 class. We'll talk about it next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks, 107.5 The Game.
Even better than I was the last time, baby. Ooh, 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 ooh.
We back.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on 107.5 The Game. Chris Clark joined me from out at the Shane Beamer football camp last Friday, and Wes, you'll actually be out there tomorrow while we're doing the show as well. And there's several of these camps going on over the course of the summer, and a big thing that you often see with these kind of things is maybe a talent that was flying under the radar a little bit that goes out there and performs really well that suddenly is garnering a lot of interest from a school like South Carolina. And that's exactly what we saw on this past week, where Fred Johnson, linebacker out of Norfolk, Virginia, performed very, very well and could be somebody that South Carolina could add in that 24 class.
Yeah, so a lot of times these camps are used as, it's an evaluation piece, certainly, but it's a little bit even deeper than that. I think sometimes you're kind of just trying to fill in the blanks, and that could mean any number of things. Sometimes it's literally, this is increasingly rare, sometimes it's literally, wait, who is this guy that just ran a 4.3? And you will maybe just discover someone, and maybe they've played at a bad football program. Maybe they're from a part of the country you don't recruit. Maybe there's some strange connection that has brought them to Columbia, South Carolina. Sometimes that happens. Other times it is, hey, we saw this guy on film, but we want to verify. Is he as big as he says he is? Is he as fast as he looks on film? The competition's not that great where he plays. We want to see him in person and watch him move. It could be any number of things. Sometimes a guy may look great at camp, and you say, well, we think we're going to offer, but we want to go back and evaluate the film first. But a lot of times it's just getting confirmations. And with Fred Johnson, I went back and looked, On 3 has him in his profile as a wide receiver, and he's listed 6'3", 195.
Right.
So if you just looked at that, if you were doing your normal research on a guy or your introductory research, you might be like, okay, he's not even 200 pounds. It's going to take a lot for him to be an SEC level linebacker, which is actually where he's being recruited now. Well, he checked in at camp 6'3.5", 225 pounds, and then ran a 4.5 40-yard dash and a 4.2 shuttle. So then you're saying, okay, 6'3", 195, yeah, you could be a wide receiver, but 6'3", 225, you could play linebacker at the SEC level. And you watch his film, it's some wide receiver, some linebacker, but certainly I think as a high upside athlete, could be rangy, long-armed, and really it seems like at this point is going to be recruited as a linebacker, has started to see his recruitment take off. South Carolina offered last week. He's going to take an official visit to South Carolina this week. I think he wants to take a couple other officials as well, but certainly to this point, South Carolina, being his first big SEC offer, I think it does set up pretty well for them, Tyler. And, they've got Wendell Gregory committed, obviously, 4-star linebacker, but I don't know the exact number they want to take at that position, but I'm sure they want to take at least one more to pair with him. And, we'll see. They'll keep the evaluation process going, but it certainly feels like this is trending towards it being someone they would have the potential to land.
Another prospect, local talent from Blythewood, Sterling Sanders, a 2025 defensive lineman. Somebody else that's kind of flying under the radar. He visited yesterday. Will be back on campus for camp next Friday, June the 16th. But and you noted here in your article on Gamecock Central, he's somebody with the size of an interior defensive lineman at the SEC level, and somebody that could be picking up an offer from South Carolina soon.
Yeah, look out for Sterling Sanders at Blythewood. 6'5", 295. That's obviously SEC size. And for what I've kind of been gathering information here, from what I've heard, he sort of just turned it on kind of towards the end of last year. And just some guys, you just never know when kind of that switch will get flipped. And at some point last year, it sort of flipped on for him. He's got Coastal Carolina. He's got Charlotte. My expectation here is that if he keeps sort of trending the way he is right now, I think it's going to be an offer list that looks much more like, South Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, like SEC offers and probably ACC offers as well. So it hasn't quite happened yet, but I think once the word gets out on this guy, the ball will sort of start rolling there. South Carolina obviously hasn't offered yet either, but if he performs the way I sort of expect, then I think you could maybe see that happen after that camp a week from tomorrow. And what would be another local guy, that 2025 class, to be honest, in-state, you have Amari Adams at the top, and I think there's a pretty big gap after him. So the 2025 class really has not, at least in-state, I'm talking about our state, not, the university. The 2025 class has not really, solidified yet. At this point last year, the 2024 class, we already knew about Cam Pringle. We already knew about Josiah Thompson. We already knew about Mazio Bennett. Blake Franks had just started to emerge. And we already kind of knew who those 4 or 5 top guys were. That really has not happened with 2025. So it always does, though. There's always a guy or two that start to emerge. I think that Sterling is probably that next guy here in the state.
And again, Wes will be out at another Shane Beamer football camp tomorrow, where he'll be joining us live during the show as South Carolina looks to find some more hidden gems out there this weekend. Up next, we're going to be talking to Nick De La Torre from Gators Online and On3 as he breaks down further this Florida baseball team, getting you set for Super Regionals starting tomorrow night at 6 o'clock here on 107.5 The Game. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. 107.5 The Game.
Hey, guys, I've been telling you every single week for the last few weeks, if you're looking for that special gift for that special graduate in your life, look no further than our friends at Gold Line Framing in West Columbia. Owner Kendall Walsh and manager Johnny James will take care of any and all your custom framing needs, from diplomas to original artwork, canvases, jerseys, and flags. They've been in business for over 20 years. Head on over to 511 12th Street, West Columbia. Check out their art gallery, home decor, furniture, and gift items in store. If you have any questions, you can give them a call at 803-739-1337. They're open Tuesday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and then Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Give them a follow on Instagram. That's at Goldline Framing SC. Again, open Tuesday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and Saturday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That is Gold Line Framing in West Columbia, South Carolina.
Nick De La Torre up next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, 107.5 The Game.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs. Founded by firemen with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks. 107.5 The Game.
All right, and we're back in on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Nick De La Torre is going to join us in a couple of minutes. Just communicated with him, said he needed a few more minutes, so we'll try and get him in the next segment. Of course, going to continue to break down the series against Florida coming up tomorrow. For Game 1 starting at 6 o'clock, pregame coverage starting here at 5:45. But very interested to get his insight and get a little more in-depth into this Florida team, which, and I know you listened to some of what Coach Kingston had to say yesterday. Very, very talented. And as we talked a little bit earlier, you played them a month and a half ago, but the way they've been playing down the stretch, especially with what we saw out of them in their regional this past weekend, it's like playing a completely different team this time around.
Yeah, it is, man. It's kind of funny what can happen in sports to kind of reset things for a team. And both those teams went in opposite directions after that series, even though it was a marquee moment for South Carolina's team, sweeping Florida. And so Florida really took their game to another level after that. And that's South Carolina the week after lost to Auburn at home and then sort of went on their skid. And now they've obviously seemed to have righted the ship a little bit. And yeah, Nick also messaged me. I think we'll have in about 10 to 15 minutes. It's saying right here. So we should still be able to have Nick today. Looking forward to some insight from him. Do we still have some audio from Kingston?
Yeah, we got a
as well?
lot of audio from Kingston, some of the players that we got to talk to yesterday. So we'll play a little bit from that and just get some more insight on where they're at, and focusing first on Coach Kingston. And obviously we've talked about the ups and downs of this team this season. And I'll start off with this, just Kingston talking a little bit about, this team having to be mentally strong through the lulls in the back half of the regular season.
Well, I mean, again, we were as good as anybody for the first 40 games, and so then we had some adversity hit, and we had to handle that. So in terms of improvement, I would say just mentally, these kids have learned some good lessons over the course of the year. And generally, teams that have to struggle to get to the end are better suited to handle adversity as it comes in the postseason. And sometimes if it's too easy all year, then it might catch up to you. So this is a team that's better off because they went through some adversity.
And we talked about how good they looked in the regional this past weekend, and winning all those games pretty handily, obviously, and that's a big confidence builder, considering how tough that last month of the regular season was. And we talked about having those 8 days off and them getting rejuvenated and getting refreshed, and they certainly looked like it when they went out there and played at Founders Park this past weekend. And you hope they can ride that wave of confidence into the Super Regional against a Florida team that's also very confident and also riding a wave of momentum as well.
Yeah, they are. And so do you buy the idea that going through some adversity during that stretch of the year helps South Carolina at this point? Or would you rather be sitting on, they were on pace, for they'd be sitting on 50 wins right now if they kept that pace. Do you buy that side? I feel like coaches sort of are going to tell you they're going to give you the positive version of whatever they need to say,
sure,
right?
Sure.
Do you buy that thought?
I do to a degree. I think it's good when you're in the postseason to know that have your vulnerabilities and you're not indestructible. And yeah, what I loved for them to have continued to go on that run where they were 36-4 through those first 40 games and continued that on for the rest of the season, sure. But I think going through that adversity and realizing you have some flaws and some things you need to work through, which again, it looked like they were able to do that in those 8 days they have off. I think that makes them stronger this time around, and when it really, really matters here in the postseason.
Well, baseball, as we talked about, man, it will eventually humble you. And you do to that point, you do kind of want to be humbled earlier as opposed to, let's look at Tennessee last year. They were the best team in the country for pretty much the entire year. And then they finally got their moment of getting humbled in postseason play. So, you don't want that. Obviously, momentum in baseball is a very fickle thing. The teams, and sometimes I feel like it can momentum can't hurt you, but there are certain things about, like making a run into the SEC tournament, getting too deep into that thing.
Sure.
Actually very much can hurt you. And we've seen that play out this year with teams that were making deep runs in the SEC tournament, turn around and either have to fight through their regional or actually not even make it out of their regional. So I think there's something to be said. Not that the momentum is bad, but that the results of that momentum in the SEC tournament, having to sort of roll through your pitching and go into Sunday, I think can be a negative. But, part of me says this momentum from this past weekend for both of these teams, one being Florida having to sort of face the brink and battle back, South Carolina just rolling through their regional. Both sides are going to come to this thing with quite a bit of confidence. But really, we see it all the time. Momentum in baseball, that door can be slammed shut just by the results of a pitcher on the other side, being phenomenal.
Right.
And, you can be a great hitting team. You can be feeling yourself. You can be doing everything right. If you run into the wrong guy on the other end, then, there's an old saying that I'm about to butcher, but it's basically the effect of, momentum runs as long as tomorrow's pitcher.
Sure.
Essentially. So, we'll see how that plays out this week. I think certainly there's going to be an uptick in certainly the pitching on the other side and an uptick in the lineups. Although, Campbell, to their credit, that was a really good lineup up and down. So, those guys were really good. But I think overall talent that you're facing, there's a big uptick. I don't expect I don't expect 15 to 14 type games. I think even if they're high scoring,
sure.
I think high scoring is like 7-6.
Yeah, and when you look at the run that Florida went on after this series earlier on in April, they were 17-5 down the stretch, and I think they only gave up more than 5 runs in 8 of those games. So obviously it's a team that pitches really, really well. And like you said, you're not going to score 19 and 16 runs this weekend more likely than not. Would that be great? Absolutely. But you're going to have to focus on getting those runs, playing small ball. We know that South Carolina hit for power really, really early on in the season really well. And that's one thing that I noticed from this past weekend of the regional is you scored 41 runs. Only 10 of those runs resulted from home runs. You were getting runs with singles and doubles and obviously walking guys with bases loaded and stuff like that. So finding a way to manufacture runs outside of just hitting it over the wall is going to be very, very important facing a team, again, that's very, very familiar with you in Florida.
And I like when teams can do that, but I think it's a great sign when teams do that. And these are hard hit singles and gap balls and balls down the line. It's largely unsustainable if you're doing that with singles, and we're talking about a seeing eye single that happens to find a hole, or we're talking about infield singles that just sort of most of the time, I'm not all in on exit velocity and sabermetrics and all that being the end-all, be-all, but for the most part, if you hit the ball hard, better things are going to happen in the long run than if you don't. So if you told me South Carolina was scoring on, a bunch of singles and they were all ground balls that just find the right spot, that would be a bad sign for me. I think the thing that will disappear this week, and that will be kind of the difference in the super high scoring we saw last week, was if you look at games 1 and 3, just the number of walks and hit by pitches and errors where you're getting free bases. Yeah. You're not going to see that, not to the extent that you saw it with Central Connecticut State and with Campbell as your opponent this past week. So that's going to take away some of those opportunities.
Right.
Maybe an inning that went, for a huge inning this past week is a much smaller opportunity this week, but you're going to have to take advantage of those if you're South Carolina. And I feel like we're just throwing some cliches out there right now. This is the case with anytime two good teams play. Right. These are the things that it comes down to. But I do think there were a lot of really good line drive swings from South Carolina, which is a great sign going into this weekend.
And just texted with Nick. He should be ready to go. Up next, we'll hit a break and talk to Nick De La Torre from Gators Online and On 3. Up next on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on 107.5 The Game.
The Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, founded by firemen, with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks, 107.5 The Game.
And welcome back into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, here on 107.5 The Game. Tyler Head and Wes Mitchell, along with you for a few more minutes before handing things over to the halftime show with Jay and Terry. We head on out to the Love Chevrolet phone lines now, and Nick De La Torre from Gators Online and On 3 joining us to give us a little bit more insight into this Gators program as South Carolina prepares to take them on in the Super Regional coming up tomorrow night. First pitch at 6 o'clock on 107.5 The Game. Nick, first of all, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to join us, and we've been talking about this a lot over the past couple days. Both these programs in very similar situations, having not gotten this far in the postseason since 2018. And obviously none of those players were on that team. Do the guys on the Gators roster understand the gravity of what they're accomplishing and what it means to this fan base and this program as a whole?
Maybe not, because you're in it. I actually was talking to Kevin O'Sullivan about that, and Florida had been to 4 College World Series in its entire program history prior to Kevin O'Sullivan showing up, and he went to 4 in his first 7 years, went to 7 in his first 11 years, or first 12 years, and they haven't been back to Omaha or even a Super Regional since 2018. And I think Kevin O'Sullivan, being a little bit older now, realizes that there's 299 Division I baseball teams, and only 16 of them have the opportunity to play this weekend. So it became not only the expectation, but a complete disappointment when the team wouldn't make it to Omaha. And I think he's realizing just how hard it is, because it wasn't hard for a while, but just how hard it is. So I think he's appreciative of it. But Florida's got a roster with a bunch of guys who could have gone and been drafted. BT Riopel, Brandon Sproat, Josh Rivera all had opportunities to get drafted, but wanted to come back to make a run. So I think that at some point, maybe on a bus in Iowa somewhere when they're in the, low A ball, they'll think about how special it was. But right now I think the guys are kind of wrapped up in it and really want to avenge a sweep where they did not look very good in Columbia earlier in the season.
Hey, Nick, it's Wes. Appreciate you doing this, man. We were actually just talking about how that series, both teams kind of, South Carolina gets the sweep, and then from that point forward, they had that stretch where they really struggled to win games. On the other hand, Florida kind of goes on a run after that. I don't know if that weekend opened their eyes or just stood as kind of a moment where they kind of had to reassess things. But what has Florida been doing these last, I don't know where the cutoff is, maybe 20 games or so where they've really just been playing, it seems like, great ball and have taken it to another level as opposed, versus that team we saw here in Columbia earlier in the season?
Walks. I mean, that really was the crescendo of how bad Florida's bullpen had been, and there's been a big change in that. Florida walked 24 Gamecocks, hit 2 more. If you want to put it in like football terminology, Florida and South Carolina aren't going to beat Georgia with 15 penalties. Like, just call a walk and a hit bat or a penalty. You're not going to beat a team like South Carolina if you're giving them 24 free passes. So Florida, on the whole this year, has the worst walks per 9 of any of Kevin O'Sullivan's 16 teams. And I think they've really, really locked that up. They're not giving away free passes. Jack Caglione specifically walked 6 Gamecocks when they were up there. He hasn't had a game where he's walked 4 or more people. He's been really good. Hurston Waldrop has been really good down the stretch. And Brandon Sproat, I might be calling him Big Game Brandon soon. He's really shown up in some of Florida's biggest games, whether that's on the road or at home. I think for Florida, the key to them has been finding and developing their bullpen into roles. Brandon Neely wasn't available because he yelled, "Let's go," at an opposing dugout and didn't even make the trip to South Carolina. He's been one of the best closers in the country. He'll be named one of the stoppers of the year, a finalist for that award today, second in the country with 12 saves. Philip Abner and Cade Fisher are the 2 left-handed guys, and Florida feels good with them pitching to righties, so they're not just lefty specialists. And then Ryan Slater, he gave up the home run that ended up being the difference in 2022 in Game 7 of the regional against Oklahoma, who finished as the national runner-up. He had a redemption story on Monday, throwing 5 scoreless in that same Game 7 situation. So I think Florida has 4 guys in the bullpen, and you don't really need much more than that when you have Brandon Sproat, Hurston Waldrop, and Jack Caglione, guys who you expect at the very least to give you 5 or 6 innings, but have the capability of throwing 7 or 8.
Jumping back over to the offensive side of things, a couple names you mentioned a few minutes ago, BT Riopel, Wyatt Langford. That's 2 names that South Carolina was able to keep in check relatively well in that series at the end of April. But as you mentioned, they're playing very well down the stretch. And just looking at their numbers from the regional this past weekend, both those guys played very well. Riopel had the 2 home runs against Texas Tech in one of those games on Monday to wrap up the regional. They seem to be riding a wave of momentum, as well as everybody on the offensive side of things heading into this super regional.
Yeah, Florida's lineup is really deep. I think Jack Caglione, obviously, he's a Golden Spikes finalist. He does it on the mound, and he's 1 home run away from tying the BB Core single-season home run record, which was just set last year. So maybe we need to look at the bats or the balls or something, because balls are flying. But Jack deserves the headlines that he's getting. But like Wyatt Langford is quietly hitting .387 and slugging .799. With 24 doubles, 18 home runs, 48 RBIs, 50 walks to 38 strikeouts. So, like, quietly having a Golden Spikes year without getting recognized for the Golden Spikes. And Wyatt is kind of the unsung hero, I guess, on this team. I think Riopel and Rivera are kind of the heartbeat guys. You obviously have great front-end pitching. But Florida's lineup is deep. So Riopelle was 0 for 15 before hitting those home runs. Josh Rivera was struggling. He goes 3 for 4. Wyatt Langford kind of carried the lineup. And Florida has another freshman, Cade Kurland, who had a miserable regional, but he was just named a freshman All-American. So Florida's lineup is just really deep. And you can have guys go through little weekend slumps. They just have enough bats to always kind of pick up the pace. And the way Florida's lineup works, if they feel like Florida's come back in 19 games this year, they feel like if they're within 2, 3, 4 runs, it's just a walk, a bloop, and a blast to get back into games. So that's kind of been their recipe. This isn't a team that South Carolina has to worry about, bunting and hitting and running. Florida would rather hit and jog.
Joined by Nick De La Torre, Gators Online. Nick, let's go back to the pitching side. Has Florida announced their rotation this weekend? And either way, who do you expect that to be? And what can you tell Gamecock fans who maybe haven't been dialed in just about these starters, kind of what they need to know about them as far as style goes?
Yeah, Florida hasn't, but I know who it'll be. We'll talk to Kevin O'Sullivan here at 2:30, and he'll announce it. But it'll be Brandon Sproat on Friday, Hurston Waldrop Saturday, and then Jack Caglione in that if necessary game. I kind of selfishly hope they get to an if necessary game. I think these are two of the best teams in the country, and I'll take any opportunity to see them play live. But Brandon Sproat and Hurston Waldrop are very interesting because of their secondary pitches. I think baseball got to a point where like curveballs went away and everyone was fastball slider. Brandon Sproat's his secondary pitch that he leans on is his changeup. He has a plus changeup, a big league pitch for him. He's a power guy. He's going to throw 99 to 100 miles an hour, especially with the adrenaline that comes with pitching in his first super regional. Hurston Waldrop on Saturday is actually the only player on Florida's roster that has played in the super regional, and that came at Southern Miss last year. They ended up losing to eventual national champion Ole Miss. But Waldrop's secondary pitch is this, he calls it a split change. It's a split finger fastball that has just unbelievable movement. It really is one of the most impressive pitches I've seen this year from any of the teams that I've watched play live. So he's another guy, 97, 98 miles an hour on the radar gun, and has a 4-pitch mix. Those are guys that South Carolina fans saw that didn't have a ton of success at Columbia, but all 3 of Florida's frontline starters, Caglione included, have pitched much better at home. And whether that's familiarity with the mound or the fans, just sleeping in your own bed before a game, they've pitched significantly better at home. I'm talking 1 to 1.5 points lower on your ERA from home and away, significantly less walks, more strikeouts. This is what Florida has been built for. They had to kind of figure things out last week in the regional after losing, but I said it every week or leading into the season, Florida fans feel good about their chances of winning 2 out of 3 every week because of these 3 starters. And Florida was able to win every SEC series this year except for the sweep of South Carolina and Texas A&M. So Florida feels good when they have their home crowd and these 3 guys in a best-of-3 series.
Hey, Nick, thanks so much for taking a few minutes of your time. We are running up on the top of the hour for the conclusion of our show. Excited to see what happens down in Gainesville this weekend.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely. Again, that was Nick De La Torre from Gators Online and on 3, and that'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Wes will be joining me tomorrow from another Shane Beamer football camp. Coming up next, Halftime Show with Jane Terry, right here on 107.5 The Game.